All set. What's up, Tommy? Hi, everybody. If I could have your attention, my name is Tom Nosworthy. I'm the president of the Town of Walk Hill Historical Association, and I want to welcome all you all here today. This is a phenomenal turnout. At this moment, if you would please rise, those that can rise, for the Pledge of Allegiance. Veterans may do a hand salute either in uniform or out of uniform, with a cover or without a cover. And if you weren't in the military, you're probably wondering what a cover is, and that's simply a hat. Angie can tell you all about that, because he knows. We face the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Well, today we do have a terrific program, and by all the advertising that we've done, through the efforts of Russell, our program director, I think it's really working. Today, Russ, as I said, is our director and works very hard at putting these programs together, and it certainly is appreciated. So Russell, if you could now come forward and do the introduction of today's speaker. Russ?
Tom and I go back to the late 50s when we used to race cars on the highway and have a few beers now and then. Tom wanted me to keep the intro short because he has another commitment to go to after he finishes here. So I don't want to take any more time from him, but I'd like to have a warm welcome for Tom Lloyd.
Well, I'm honored to be at this gathering of people who have an interest in the history of the town of Walk Hill. Like Russ said, he and his wife Barbara and my wife Jean and I, we hung together in the 50s and 60s. Russ and I were into drag racing and riding motorcycles. Jean rode with me for 36 years. Let's start with, how did the Lloyds get to Sullivan County? In the late 1800s up until the 1970s, it was common for families from New York City to come to the mountains, the Borscht Belt. There were hotels, resorts, boarding houses, and thousands of bungalows. My great-grandfather and his sons had a very successful stock market brokerage in Brooklyn. They also had a summer place right up the street from where my house is. His son Thomas, that's my grandfather, he graduated at the top of his class in Yale. He was a very intelligent person, and you know, sometimes when people are almost a little bit too smart, they waver on different things. Lovingly behind his back, we refer to him as Crazy Tom. He was searching for something. He didn't like the business, so he wanted to try and find something. He found religion. He wanted to become a minister, and after he was into that for a while, he decided he said, I can see through things that don't make sense, so he gave that up. Then he became a socialist. You know the old thing about getting a soapbox and standing up so people could see it? Well, he did that in New York City. And he used to preach socialism. In fact, in the house, I found a couple little pamphlets on the socialism. There were few good roads, and cars and motorcycles didn't really appear until roughly 1908 is when you started to see more of them on the road. Transportation was mostly provided by the railroad, which came to Highview, and of course, horse and buggies. One summer, while visiting his father's place, one summer my grandfather spotted a 7-acre piece of property not far from the family getaway. He decided to become a farmer. He built a poultry farm. They sold chickens and eggs and had a vast garden, and they sold the vegetables. Of course, back then you had a bunch of kids because they became workers. And all the kids worked on the farm. They kind of specialized in strawberries. There's one piece of acreage on the property where it was almost an acre of strawberries. And what they would do, they'd pick all the nicest ones for sale, and then the rejects, not the perfect ones, my grandmother would make jam out of those for the family. Joe was the oldest. Joe only went to 9th grade, but he was brilliant. He did engineering. He was an artist, a photographer. At one time, he was the town of Mamakating assessor. He was an active fireman. Joe's specialization in photography was accidents, and I've got stacks of photographs home of plane crashes and accidents. Some of them are terribly gory. They're not pleasant to look at. But he never married, and he ran the farm for his parents. And then later he went to work for his brother as an engineer. Joe could engineer anything. I remember one time in the meat department where this packages of meat that were already weighed came down this little conveyor, and they had to have a way to get them over to another part where the ladies would wrap and price them. And Joe designed this clever little elevator type conveyor thing, and Eddie Gunnival built it. He was amazing. Helen went to Cornell and became an expert in biology and nature. She married a classmate, a British man named Samuel Bertram Jervis. My dad tells a story. Helen invited Bert home for the weekend one time, and they're waiting for Bert. Where's Bert? Well, it was raining, nasty, windy, nasty night. And they hear an engine coming down the driveway, and it was Bert on a motorcycle. That was the first time my dad met Bert. Bert became a career U.S. Air Force. In fact, he retired a major. And he got a Purple Heart. He was wounded a couple of times. One of the times he was driving a general in Burma, and he ran over a landmine and it flipped the Jeep upside down. And after retired from the Air Force, he and Helen traveled the world, especially going back to England a lot because that's where Bert was from. They had one daughter named Helen. She's since passed away. She suffered most of her life with cerebral palsy. Clifford also went to Cornell, a professor of astronomy, geology, biology, and he taught at Orange County. Clifford marched to the beat of a different drummer. Number one, he didn't like to be called a teacher. He said, "We're educators." He refused to have a mortgage. Slight in stature, his body was contorted and twisted due to polio. Despite his handicap, he physically built himself a cinder block house out in Pine Bush. He was somewhat of an inventor. He would come up with craziest stuff. For example, the heat for this house, which he designed, the wood stove was about 2 foot wide and about 8 foot long, about 2 foot tall. And the way he engineered it, you put your big wood in first and you put your kindling on the top, opposite what you would normally do. And the way he had it designed, it worked flawlessly. It was a marvelous design. His wife's name was Geraldine, and they had 2 daughters, Mary and Janet. The house and barn were built in 1908. It's in English, Tudor, Lloyd, okay? And it was designed by an architect, which is pretty early for back in 1908. But it was a very quality house with very early poured concrete foundation instead of using fieldstone like they used to do back then. It had chestnut trim, Morgan windows and doors, and a dumbwaiter that went from the kitchen down into the basement. That's where they used to cut ice on the kiln. That's when they had ice boxes, and they'd use a dumbwaiter to bring the ice up into the kitchen. And when my grandmother was canning, she used a dumbwaiter to bring the things down into the cellar and put them in this little room. The most interesting fact about the house was it had a septic system with a buried tank and tile fields. I've been told of this article. I'd love to get my hands on it, but it said it was written up. Before it was called Burlingham Road, it was just called the North Road. It was a North Road out of the village. And there was an article in the paper in 1908, the Lloyd house on the North Road with the unsanitary contraption. People used it to ask my grandfather, you go to the bathroom in your house? I mean, that was a lot better than going to an outhouse at 2 o'clock on a February morning. But they had chamber pots anyway. And then there was Ed. The 3 previous siblings were born in Brooklyn. Dad was born in the bedroom where we sleep on February 12th, 1912, same year as the Titanic, and coincidentally Lincoln's birthday, February 12th. My father idolized Abraham Lincoln. He read every book he could get his hands on, and he could tell you about Lee and Grant. He was actually quite an expert on the Civil War. His first 2 years in high school, he went to Bloomingburg, and the second 2 years, he went to Middletown. After high school, he got a good job on the railroad in Highview, along with working on the farm. Still had to work on the farm. He had a good job and a fairly new Model A Ford. He wanted more. He looked at different colleges and settled on the University of Pennsylvania, the Wharton School of Business. There was a $5 filing fee, and he asked his father for advice. And his father said, "Are you $5 curious, Eddie?" In other words, like, that's a lot of money. Instead of encouraging the kid and say, "Go for it," he didn't do that. With a modest loan from his Aunt Bessie. Now, Aunt Bessie was his father's sister. And by the way, he had all the rest of her life, he took very good care of her. He, financially, and every Christmas when my brother and I were little kids, we always had to go up and see Aunt Bessie, and he would bring her groceries and nice little things. He took very good care of Aunt Bessie. He headed to college. He considered becoming a lawyer, but was uncomfortable about the position that would affect other people's futures. He decided on business. He literally worked his way through college. He made fudge in his room at night and sold it when he went to school the next day. He rented his car to students that had more money so they could go out on dates on the weekends while he was working. He was a busboy in his boarding house, and when he would bring the used dishes back to the kitchen, he noticed that the woman was taking certain stuff out and putting it in soup pots and so on and kind of recycling it, okay? He didn't like that. So he made a point of dumping the ashtrays in the food before he'd take them into the kitchen. So she couldn't do that. One day a job was posted on the bulletin board in the college about a cashier's job at Tasty Cake. Tasty Cake was a huge, successful bakery in Philadelphia. He talked with one of his friends, and his friend says, "Don't bother to go down there. It's been on the board all day. You're wasting your time." Well, he went down, he got the job. And that was a lesson for us kids. Don't ever give up. When you think things don't look possible, whatever, keep swinging. Don't give up. Once he was there, in fact, this is how he got the job. At the interview, the truck drivers come in with bags of coin and drop them in these stations, and then people would count them. So he's watching them. The guy doing dimes, 10, 20, 30, 40. My father says, whoa, you got it all wrong. He moves the guy over and he brings everything up to the edge of the counter and he goes, 20, 40, 60, 80. He taught them how to count money. One summer he was home, he got a job at the Middletown Ford dealership selling new and used cars. Ed Lloyd, a used car salesman. The name, he told me the name of it, but it escapes me right now. He got good grades, but told me that he had to work very hard for them. He was athletic. He excelled in crew rowing and ice speed skating. In fact, I had his skates from college. They were about this long. And unfortunately, over the years, I let them get away from me. He was very, very fast at swimming. That was the main thing he excelled. He was a very fast swimmer. Every year he would put on a clam bake for his employees and their families, and this was top drawer. This was a marvelous occasion. And one year at Greenwood Lake, no, not Greenwood, what is it? Tilson. At Tilson Lake, a couple young bucks challenged my father to a race across the lake. With his Australian crawl, he whipped both of them. After graduation, he returned to Bloomingburg. There was a store in the village called Bell's, and he leased the store from Mr. Bell and opened his first store in Bloomingburg. Now, this is still during the Depression, so things were hard. It was hard to make a go of it, but one of the mistakes he did was he gave local boy makes good, and he gave credit to a lot of his customers, the local people, and they kind of stiffed him, and Bloomingburg was not a success. One story I enjoyed telling, when the customer would bring the groceries up to the counter, they'd take the paper bag with a pencil, and you'd write each one of the amount of the items there, and then add them up and tell the customer what it was. Well, the day before, the old timer came in, and when he thought my father wasn't looking, he took a 5-cent cigar off the counter and slipped it in his pocket. So the next time he came in, my father writes everything all up, and the guy says, well, what's this 5 cents on the bottom? He says, that's for the cigar in your pocket. He didn't want to lose him as a customer, but he got paid for the cigar. In the mid-40s, he'd opened a store on 44 Knapp Avenue in Middletown. Raymond Swam was the owner, and he wanted to retire. Dad leased it and later bought him out. Mr. Swam was the mayor of Middletown at one time. He realized that there was money to be made specializing in meat. The barn behind the store was converted to a large cooler. His butchers were Ed Downey, Harry Long, which he brought up through the chain of command over the years, and they were loyal with him to the end. The business was also livery. That meant you could call and get your groceries delivered. And the delivery vehicle was a 1939 Ford sedan delivery. Very valuable collectible car today. I'd kill to have it. It's basically like a passenger car, but it had one door in the back. Well, he had a young driver making deliveries, and the kid wrecked the car. Now, in 1942, you couldn't buy cars anymore, because as of December 31st, 1941, we were at war, and the government says people can't buy new cars anymore. That's why there are very, very few 1942 cars on the road. Well, there was a body man in Middletown named Sid Warren. Everybody was scrambling to buy cars. You couldn't get them. And this Sid Warren restored this truck. And my father said there wasn't a bent panel on it when he took it to Sid Warren. When he got it back, he said it looked like new. We lived on West Main Street. I used to ride my bicycle up to the store, and I would hang out. Business was good. He always wanted a daughter. My mother had several miscarriages. I was the first one that made it through, and my brother Jim made it through. But my father always wanted a daughter. So they started the adoption process, and it took 2 years. And I remember coming home one time, and there's the legal people with this gorgeous little strawberry blonde girl. And they say, here's your sister. Well, I had just come home from playing on a playground down on Mulberry Street. My brother was still down there. So I ran down Hanford Street all the way, and I'm shouting across the playground, we got our sister, we got our sister. And Jimmy and I ran home as fast as we could, and there was Susan. She became a music teacher and married another music teacher, and she lives in Long Island. She's got 3 wonderful daughters. Well, my father was an excellent butcher. In fact, all through his career, the meat department was his pet. When he was down on the floor, he always checked the meat department, made sure everything was up to his, specifications, because meat was expensive, and if you didn't have good butchers and didn't cut it right and you had waste, you didn't make as much money. Well, one day at Nap Avenue, while operating a cube steak machine, you take the pieces of meat, and it had like a little funnel type thing on the top, and you drop the meat down in there, and there was a drum with these little knives that went around, and that's why it gave that line. So it would come out the bottom, you'd take it, turn it 90 degrees, and drop it back down in there. Now it had a crosshatch pattern. Well, it wasn't uncommon, sometimes the meat would get stuck. So what the butchers used to do, they used to just take their fingers and they just tickle it a little bit and it would fall out. Well, my father over-tickled it one time and grabbed his hand, and it cut off the end of his fingers. Well, gangrene set in, and it was a marvelous old doctor in Middletown, Dr. Pyle. He was legendary. It was rumored that his brother was Ernie Pyle, the famous war correspondent. And he's got an appointment to go up to the hospital and get the rest of his fingers taken off. Dr. Pyle says, I know you've been through hell, but if you're willing to try something else, I got something up my sleeve. My father says, go for it. He said, I want you to soak your fingers in urine. Keep them constantly in urine. Well, it worked. And the end of these 2 fingers was gone, and he had a little bit of a hook on this first finger. When I was a kid, here again on West Main Street, I was playing baseball with the bigger kids, and since I was a young one, I had to be the catcher. And the kid took a real heavy backswing, and he hit me along the side of my head here. I got a fractured skull, and almost lost my eye. That's one reason my eyes aren't totally 100%, because my skull got twisted. And I remember it left me with quite a scar. And I was talking with my dad one time, and I told him how the scar bothered me. And he says, shake hands with me. I shook hands with him. What did you notice? I said, nothing. Shake hands with me again. Shook hands again. He said, what did you notice? He says, well, look at my hand. And I said, well, I've seen that all my life. That's not new to me. He said, do you know how many people I meet and how many times I have to extend my hand, this chewed up hand, and, shake hands with them? Don't let the scar bother you. It'll eventually go away, and it practically did. Lloyd's was the first in New York State to have a pharmacy in a grocery store. He hired a talented young pharmacist named Tommy Smith, and he helped him relocate to Middletown. The store was stocked, ready for business. Local Middletown pharmacists complained to Albany, and the license was revoked days before the opening. My father got a hold of his friend Ben Gilman, and they jumped into his 49 Mercury, like that car too, and they went to Albany. And they told my father, history and the past shows that you would be better off in a more populated city of Middletown instead of a cow pasture outside the city limits. And my father's answer was typical Ed Lloyd. Instead of dwelling on the past, have you ever thought about the future? He came home with a license. One of his expressions was, no matter how bad things are, financial, health, or whatever, do not accept setbacks. And he used that all his life, and it was very, very helpful to him. Do not accept setbacks. Lloyd Shopping Center, notice shopping center, not grocery store, shopping center. Opened for business in December of 1950 on Montgomery Road. It was just a simple 2-lane road that went to Montgomery. 284, and of course now it's Route 211 East. I was 8 years old. My brother Jim and I were excused for being late from school. My mother cut the ribbon. The concept was under one roof shopping with many innovations such as pre-packaged meat. When he first opened the store, one of his customers from Napa Avenue stopped him in the meat aisle and said, "Mr. Lloyd, I see you have the meat all cut and packaged and priced. Is that really any good?" And he says, "Well, let me ask you. If you bought the meat, took it home and cooked it, and you didn't like it, would you ever buy it again?" She says, "Absolutely not." He gives her a wink and he says, "Try the meat." Well, it went statewide, and then it went nationwide. Motorized checkout counters, which he and my Uncle Joe originally designed. I remember them working on them on the back porch of the Napa Avenue store. And a pharmacy. Just before the opening, my father let Mr. Smith continue to let his cows graze on the unused pasture. One night there was a lightning storm, and the lightning killed 4 cows, and 2 of them died standing up. Cows can sleep standing up. They lock their legs. And that was in the article in the Middletown Times-Herald. See, that was before the Record. The Record was a morning paper, so that was in the Times-Herald. Well, with a big grand opening splash planned, and again, ads in the Middletown Times-Herald, there was a snowstorm. And my father told the manager, said, "Get the biggest coffee maker we have off the shelf and start making coffee." He said, "If these people can come out in weather like this, the least we can do is buy them a cup of coffee." Well, that tradition lasted for 30 years. There was always a free cup of coffee at Lloyd's. And also, he had benches strategically placed around the store so elderly folks could sit down. He kept 44 Nap open for another several years, and he had a shuttle truck that would go from the main store up to Napa Avenue. You make your money when you buy. Volume is the key to giving lower prices to customers. Lloyd's was a big fish in a small pond. He bought tractor-trailer loads of sugar and coffee and paper towels. Warehousing was very important back then. It was critical. The whole good part of the store was warehouse with shelving and conveyors. And business isn't done that way today. They don't tie up money in inventory. I mean, you go to your local parts store for automotive stuff, and they say, "Well, I can have it tomorrow." They don't stock stuff, like they used to. He bought his first tractor trailer. It was a Mack. He bought it brand new from Mack over in Newburgh. Can't be mown right in here. Oh, there was, when I was 17, there was a garage I used to hang out at and do a little mechanical work, and I got to know a couple of the truck drivers, and every night they would take loads of celery from Pine Island down to Campbell Soup in Camden, New Jersey, and I talked myself into going with them, and they used to let me drive. 17, I was driving tractor trailer. I was in heaven. So they bought this brand new Mack from Newburgh, and the driver's name was George Stewart. He lived in Montgomery. And he brings the tractor to the store, and parks it out in front of the dry goods wing there, and he goes inside to get my father and Ed Downey and Harry Long, going to show him the brand new tractor. Well, I knew we were getting it, and I saw it out there in the lot. Well, the keys were in it, and I took it for a joyride. They come out, and the tractor trailer's gone. So I caught hell for that. My mother, who was very artistically talented, painted signs, created displays, and even dressed up as the Easter Bunny. She did all kinds of things behind the scenes that really helped Lloyd's, move ahead. Her name was Edna, but she was known all her life as Bunny. It didn't have anything to do with the bunny suit. She created the logo, a woman's face with long flowing windblown hair,